The blood-red sun hung low over the jagged silhouette of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, as Victoria Ainsworth stumbled into the dusty town of Redemption Springs, Colorado, 1878. Her once beautiful face was a canvas of purple bruises, her split lip still crusted with dried blood, and her eyes, those eyes that had once sparkled with life and laughter, were now hollow voids, empty of everything but pain. She collapsed in the middle of the street, the last of her strength finally giving out after 3 days of desperate flight. Wade Norton had been watching the horizon from the porch of the Dusty Nail Saloon, sipping whiskey to ease the ache in his bones from a long day of working cattle. The tall, broad-shouldered cowboy was first to see the lone figure staggering into town, first to reach her as she fell. As he gathered her broken form into his arms, the woman flinched violently, her terror as palpable as the evening heat. "Easy now," Wade murmured, his voice gentle despite its natural roughness. "You're safe here, miss. No one's going to hurt you." Her vacant stare met his, and in that moment Wade made a promise to her and to himself. "I don't know what happened to you, but I'll wait until you smile again. However long that takes." Victoria had no reason to believe him. Her world had been shattered by the very man who'd vowed to cherish her. Yet something in the cowboy's earnest blue eyes and the careful way he held her, as if she might shatter like fine china, made her want to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, there might be one good man left in this cruel world. Doctor Samuel Higgins shook his head as he finished examining Victoria in the small room above the saloon. 3 cracked ribs, extensive bruising, mild concussion, and what looks like defensive wounds on her hands and arms. He glanced at Wade, who stood by the door, hat clutched in his calloused hands. "Whoever did this meant business. She's lucky to be alive." "Will she recover, Doc?" Wade asked, his voice tight with an anger he couldn't quite contain, physically, given time and care. The doctor packed his instruments into his worn leather bag. "The rest," he sighed. "That kind of healing I can't prescribe," Wade nodded grimly. "She'll have what she needs." "She hasn't spoken a word, not even to tell me her name," Dr. Higgins added. "She will when she's ready." Wade placed a few coins in the doctor's palm. "Thank you, Sam." After the doctor left, Wade approached the bed where Victoria lay, her eyes open but seeing nothing. "I've asked Martha to sit with you tonight," he said softly. "She owns the dress shop down the street. She's a good woman, widowed during the war. You'll be safe with her." Victoria's gaze flickered to his face, a moment of recognition, of awareness, before retreating back to that empty void. Wade set a glass of water on the table beside her. "I'll be back tomorrow. You rest now." As he turned to leave, her hand shot out, fingers closing weakly around his wrist. It was the first voluntary movement she'd made since collapsing. Though she said nothing, her grip tightened fractionally. "I'll stay until Martha arrives," Wade promised, settling into the wooden chair beside the bed. "You're not alone anymore." For 3 days, Victoria remained silent, her body healing faster than her spirit. Martha Cooper tended to her physical needs, bathing her, helping her dress, coaxing her to eat small bites of stew and sips of broth. And each day, Wade came to sit with her, sometimes talking softly about inconsequential things, the weather, his horses, the latest town gossip, and sometimes simply sitting in companionable silence as the hours stretched between them. On the 4th day, as Wade was leaving after his evening visit, Victoria spoke for the first time. "Victoria," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. "My name is Victoria." Wade turned, his weathered face breaking into a gentle smile. "Wade Norton, Miss Victoria. Pleased to properly make your acquaintance." It was a beginning, small but significant, like the first tender shoot breaking through hard soil after a long winter. The next day, Wade arrived with a book. "Martha mentioned you were eyeing this on her shelf," he said, placing the volume of Tennyson's poems on the nightstand. "Thought you might like something to occupy your mind." Victoria's fingers traced the embossed leather cover. "Thank you," she managed, the words still coming with difficulty. Wade sat in what had become his chair, stretching his long legs before him. "I can't say I understand much of that fancy poetry myself," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile, "but my ma was fond of reading. Said it transported her from our hardscrabble farm to places grand and beautiful." Victoria watched him, this rough-hewn man who seemed so out of place discussing poetry, yet spoke of it with such respect. "Would you?" She began hesitantly. "Would you like me to read some to you?" Something warm bloomed in Wade's chest. "I'd like that very much, Miss Victoria." And so she read, her voice growing stronger with each verse, each stanza a step away from the darkness that had enveloped her. Wade listened, not always understanding the meaning behind the elegant words, but understanding perfectly the healing taking place before his eyes. "Where are you staying?" Victoria asked the following week, when she was well enough to sit in a chair by the window, watching the bustling street below. "Got a small cabin about 2 miles out of town," Wade replied. "Nothing fancy, but it keeps the rain off and the coyotes out." "And your work?" "I'm foreman at the Rockingham Ranch," he explained. "Frank Miller's place northwest of town. Good outfit, fair boss. Been there going on 5 years now." Victoria nodded, absorbing this information. "You must wonder about me," she said finally, her fingers twisting in her lap. "About what happened?" Wade leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Only what you want to tell me when you want to tell me. Some things need time." Victoria turned to look out the window again, watching a group of children chase a hoop down the dusty street. "I was married," she said, so quietly Wade had to strain to hear. "Edmund Ainsworth, banker from Boston. We came west when he was offered a position in Denver." She swallowed hard. "He wasn't what he seemed." Wade remained silent, letting her find her way through the story at her own pace. "The first time he hit me was 3 months after our wedding. He apologized so beautifully afterward, brought me flowers, swore it would never happen again." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I believed him. I wanted to believe him." Her hand unconsciously touched her ribs where the worst of the bruising remained. It only got worse. Each time the apologies grew shorter, the incidents more frequent, until this, Wade finished gently. Victoria nodded, a single tear tracking down her cheek. "I thought he would kill me this time. When he finally passed out from drinking, I took what little money I could find and ran. I walked, hitched rides when I could. I don't even know how I got here. Everything after leaving Denver is a blur." Wade's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice steady. "You're safe here, Victoria. I give you my word." She turned to face him fully then, her eyes no longer empty but burning with a fierce question. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me. You owe me nothing." Wade considered her question carefully. "My pa used to say that a man's character is measured by what he does when no one's looking, and how he treats those who can offer him nothing in return." He shrugged. "Maybe I'm just trying to measure up." Victoria studied him, seeing past the sun-weathered skin and the calloused hands to something essential in the man before her. "What if he comes looking for me?" Wade's expression hardened. "Then he'll find me waiting." 2 weeks after Victoria's arrival in Redemption Springs, Martha Cooper approached Wade as he left the general store. "That girl needs proper clothes and fresh air," the widow declared without preamble. "She can't hide in that room forever." Wade shifted the sack of supplies he was carrying. "She's still healing, Martha. Her body, perhaps, but her spirit needs mending too, and that won't happen locked away from the world." Martha's expression softened. "She trusts you, Wade, more than she realizes, I think. Wade considered this. "What do you suggest?" "Bring her to Sunday dinner at my place tomorrow. Just us three." A small step back into living. The next day, Wade stood outside Victoria's door, more nervous than he'd been facing down a stampeding herd. He'd bathed thoroughly, trimmed his beard, and put on his best shirt, the blue one he normally saved for Christmas and funerals. Victoria opened the door at his knock, and Wade's breath caught. She'd borrowed one of Martha's simpler dresses, a modest blue calico that nonetheless highlighted the returning color in her cheeks and the copper highlights in her dark hair. The bruises on her face had faded to yellowish shadows. "You look—" Wade fumbled for words that wouldn't sound too forward or too bland. "Better," Victoria suggested with the ghost of a smile. "Beautiful," Wade said simply. A flush crept up Victoria's neck. "Martha helped me with my hair," she said, touching the simple knot at the nape of her neck self-consciously. "It suits you." Wade offered his arm. "Shall we?" Victoria hesitated, her hand hovering just above his sleeve. "There will be people out there watching, wondering." "Let them wonder," Wade replied steadily. "You've done nothing to be ashamed of." With a deep breath, Victoria placed her hand on his arm. "I'm ready." The walk to Martha's cottage was only 3 blocks, but for Victoria it might as well have been miles. Each curious glance from a passerby, each tipped hat or neighborly greeting to Wade felt like an assessment, a judgment. But Wade's solid presence beside her, unhurried and protective without being overbearing, gave her courage. Martha's dinner was simple but delicious: roast chicken, fresh bread, early summer vegetables from her kitchen garden. The conversation flowed more easily than Victoria had expected, with Martha regaling them with town gossip and Wade contributing dry observations that often made both women laugh. It was the first time Victoria had laughed since arriving in Redemption Springs, and the sound surprised her, bubbling up from somewhere she thought had been permanently silenced. Wade looked at her across the table, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's a nice sound," he said softly. Victoria dropped her gaze to her plate, suddenly self-conscious, but not displeased, after dinner, as Martha cleared the dishes, refusing all offers of help. Wade and Victoria found themselves on the small front porch, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. "Thank you for today," Victoria said after a comfortable silence. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." "Martha's a wise woman," Wade replied. "Wiser than me by far." Victoria turned to study his profile, strong and steady against the darkening sky. "You're selling yourself short, Mr. Norton." Wade smiled ruefully. "Wouldn't be the first time I've been accused of that. My father always said I had more sense with horses than with people." "Tell me about your family," Victoria requested, settling more comfortably on the porch swing. Wade leaned against the railing, crossing his arms over his chest. "Not much to tell. Ma died when I was 15, consumption. Pa followed 5 years later. Heart gave out while he was mending fences in the north pasture." His voice held old grief, long since accepted. "No brothers or sisters." "Just me." "So you came west," Wade nodded. "Nothing holding me in Missouri after Pa died. Sold the farm, bought a good horse, and pointed him toward the setting sun." He smiled at the memory. "I was 23 and thought I knew everything worth knowing." "And now?" Victoria asked. Wade's eyes met hers, startlingly direct. "Now I know I don't know much at all, except that life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it." The moment stretched between them, fragile and pregnant with possibility, until Martha's screen door creaked open, breaking the spell. "Pie's ready," she announced cheerfully. "Fresh blackberry." As they rose to go inside, Wade offered Victoria his hand. She took it without hesitation, his warm palm against hers, a silent promise neither was ready to name. Over the next few weeks, Victoria slowly emerged from her shell, venturing out more frequently to church on Sundays, to the general store for small purchases, even occasionally to the milliner's to admire the latest hats that had arrived from Denver. Always with Martha, or Wade nearby, a protective presence against the curious stares and whispered speculations that inevitably followed a new face in a small town. "You need occupation," Martha declared one afternoon as they sat in her parlor, Victoria helping to mend a stack of shirts brought in by one of the local ranch hands. "Something to fill your days and your mind." Victoria tied off a neat stitch. "I've been thinking the same." "I can't impose on your kindness forever." Martha waved away the concern. "You're no imposition, girl, but idle hands make for a troubled spirit." She considered Victoria thoughtfully. "What did you do before? Before you came here?" Victoria set down her mending. "In Boston, I taught music, piano mostly, some voice. After we married, Edmund didn't think it proper for his wife to work." Her mouth twisted. "He preferred me at home where he could control things." "Can you read and write well?" Martha asked abruptly. "Yes. I attended Miss Pemberton's school for young ladies in Philadelphia. My father believed in education for both his sons and daughters." Martha nodded decisively. "Then it's settled. You'll go see Abigail Thornton tomorrow. She runs the school here, and she's been looking for someone to help with the younger children. Too many pupils for one teacher now that Redemption Springs is growing." Victoria's heart quickened. "Do you think she would consider me? I have no formal teaching credentials." "Abigail cares about two things: can you manage the children, and do you know more than they do?" Martha smiled. "The rest is just paper." The next morning, Victoria stood outside the small white schoolhouse on the edge of town, her stomach fluttering with nerves. She'd borrowed another of Martha's dresses, this one a sensible brown that would not show chalk dust, and pulled her hair back in a severe bun that she hoped made her look older and more authoritative than her 22 years. The schoolmistress, Abigail Thornton, was a tall, angular woman with keen eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Victoria of her own most formidable instructors at Miss Pemberton's. But beneath the stern exterior, Victoria quickly discerned a genuine love for teaching and for her pupils. "Martha speaks highly of you," Miss Thornton said, assessing Victoria with those sharp eyes. "Says you're educated and good with figures." "I had excellent schooling," Victoria acknowledged, "and I've taught music before, though never general subjects. Can you handle discipline?" "These aren't pampered Eastern children. They're frontier stock, high-spirited and sometimes rough around the edges." Victoria straightened her shoulders. "I believe I can, Miss Thornton." The older woman studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "Very well. You may assist with the younger children reading, basic arithmetic, and penmanship. 3 days a week to start, 9 until 2. If that works out, we'll discuss something more permanent." Relief and gratitude washed over Victoria. "Thank you. I won't disappoint you." As she left the schoolhouse, Victoria nearly collided with Wade, who was leading his horse down the main street. "Whoa there," he said, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "You look like you're walking on clouds. Good news." Victoria couldn't contain her smile. "Miss Thornton has agreed to let me help at the school. I start on Monday." Wade's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "That's wonderful, Victoria. The children will be lucky to have you. It's just a trial position," she cautioned, "but it's a start, a chance to be useful again." Wade's hand was still on her arm, warm and reassuring. "You were never not useful, just finding your way." Victoria looked up at him, this man who had become her anchor in a storm she'd thought would drown her. "Thank you for believing that, even when I couldn't." Wade's expression softened. "How about we celebrate? Saturday's the harvest dance at the town hall. Nothing fancy, just music and dancing, folks bringing food to share." He hesitated, suddenly seeming less sure of himself. "Would you consider attending?" "With me?" Victoria felt a flutter of panic. A public event with the entire town present, Wade openly escorting her. It was a statement, a declaration of sorts. "Wade, people would talk." "People already talk," he replied with a shrug. "Nature of small towns." "What about?" Victoria couldn't bring herself to say Edmund's name. "What if word gets back to Denver?" Wade's expression turned serious. "Victoria, you're not property. You left a man who hurt you. There's no shame in that." "The law might not see it that way," she said quietly. "A wife belongs to her husband." Wade's jaw tightened. "No person belongs to another. Not in any way that matters." He took a breath. "But I understand your concerns. We could go as friends, nothing more. Just a foreman escorting a schoolteacher to a town event." Victoria considered this, weighing her fears against the simple joy of an evening of music and companionship. "As friends," she agreed finally. "I would like that." Wade's smile returned, warming his eyes. "I'll call for you at 7 then." As he tipped his hat and continued down the street, Victoria watched him go, wondering when exactly this rough-hewn cowboy had come to mean so much to her, and what she was going to do about the feelings growing steadily in her heart. The harvest dance was held in the town hall, a sturdy building that served as church, meeting place, and social center for Redemption Springs. When Wade arrived to escort Victoria, he was wearing a clean black suit that looked rarely worn but well cared for, his usually unruly hair slicked back with pomade. "You clean up nicely, Mr. Norton," Victoria teased gently, trying to hide her nervousness behind light words. "And you look like a vision, Miss Ainsworth," Wade replied with simple sincerity that made Victoria's cheeks warm. She'd spent hours that afternoon working on the pale green dress Martha had helped her alter, adding a bit of lace at the collar and cuffs, trying to fashion something festive from the limited materials available. Her efforts had produced a gown that was modest yet flattering, highlighting her slender waist and the graceful curve of her neck. The walk to the town hall was filled with anticipation, the sounds of fiddle music and laughter growing louder as they approached. At the entrance, Victoria hesitated. "Having second thoughts?" Wade asked softly. Victoria squared her shoulders. "No, it's been a long time since I attended any social gathering. Even before everything happened, Edmund didn't approve of such things." Wade's expression darkened briefly at the mention of her husband, but he quickly schooled his features. "Well, I guarantee this will be nothing like those fancy Boston affairs, just good people enjoying simple pleasures." Inside, the hall was transformed. Paper lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the wooden floor cleared for dancing. Long tables lined the walls, laden with dishes brought by townspeople: fried chicken, hams, potato salads, cornbread, and pies of every description. At the far end, a small band of local musicians, 2 fiddlers, a banjo player, and a man with a harmonica played a lively tune while couples twirled around the floor. "Wade Norton, As I Live and Breathe." A plump, middle-aged woman approached them, her round face flushed with exertion from dancing. "Never thought I'd see you at one of these affairs willingly," Wade grinned, touching the brim of the hat he'd just removed. "Evening, Mrs. Patterson. Thought I'd make an exception tonight." He turned to Victoria. "Victoria Ainsworth, this is Harriet Patterson, wife of our esteemed mayor and maker of the best apple pies west of the Mississippi." Mrs. Patterson beamed at the introduction, her curious eyes taking in Victoria from head to toe. "So you're the young lady staying with Martha?" "We've all been wondering about you, dear." Such a mysterious arrival, Victoria tensed, but Wade smoothly intervened. Mrs. Patterson, is that your famous buttermilk pie I see on the dessert table? Victoria was just saying how she's never tasted a proper Western buttermilk pie. The older woman immediately took the bait, launching into an explanation of her prize-winning recipe as she steered Victoria toward the food tables, Wade following with an amused quirk to his lips. After sampling what felt like half the dishes on offer and being introduced to a dizzying array of townspeople, Victoria found herself standing with Wade at the edge of the dance floor, watching the spirited movements of the dancers. "Ready to give it a try?" Wade asked, nodding toward the floor where the band had struck up a waltz. Victoria hesitated. "It's been a while," she admitted, "and I'm more familiar with formal ballroom dancing than—" She gestured to the enthusiastic if somewhat unpolished couples whirling around. Wade held out his hand, his eyes twinkling. "Just follow my lead. I promise not to step on your toes. Much." With a laugh that surprised her with its ease, Victoria placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her onto the floor. Despite his self-deprecating words, Wade proved to be a competent dancer, guiding her confidently through the simple waltz steps. "Where did you learn to dance?" Victoria asked as they moved together, her initial stiffness giving way to the natural rhythm of the music. "My mother insisted," Wade replied with a reminiscent smile. "Said no son of hers was going to grow up to be a clumsy oaf at social gatherings. She taught me in our kitchen, counting steps while Pa pretended not to watch from his chair by the fire." Victoria tried to picture it a younger Wade, all gangly limbs and earnest concentration, learning to dance under his mother's patient instruction. The image warmed her heart. "She taught you well. She'd have liked you," Wade said softly, his eyes never leaving hers as they turned. "She valued kindness and courage above all else." The simple compliment touched Victoria deeply, and for a moment she couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she tightened her fingers slightly on his shoulder, hoping he would understand. The music shifted to a more lively tune, and Wade spun her in a quick circle that brought a surprised laugh from her lips. Around them, other couples clapped and stomped in time with the fiddles, the energy in the room building with each measure. For the first time in what felt like forever, Victoria felt truly alive, truly present in her own body. The fear and shame that had been her constant companion since fleeing Denver seemed distant, unable to touch her in this moment of simple joy. As the evening progressed, Victoria danced not only with Wade but with several other men from the community: Mr. Patterson, the mayor, Dr. Higgins, and even young Timothy Fletcher, the blacksmith's apprentice who blushed furiously through the entire reel. Each introduction, each conversation, wove her more firmly into the fabric of Redemption Springs. During a break in the dancing, Victoria stepped outside to catch her breath in the cool night air. The stars blazed overhead, impossibly bright and numerous in the clear mountain sky. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Wade's voice came from behind her as he joined her on the small porch. "Never get tired of looking up and seeing that." Victoria nodded, wrapping her arms around herself against the evening chill. Without comment, Wade slipped off his jacket and placed it gently around her shoulders. The wool was warm from his body, carrying his scent: leather, soap, and something uniquely him. "Thank you for bringing me tonight," Victoria said, turning to look at him in the silvery moonlight. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." Wade leaned against the porch railing, his face half in shadow. "The town's taken a shine to you, not that I'm surprised." Victoria smiled ruefully. "They're curious about me, the mysterious woman who appeared from nowhere." "They respect privacy here," Wade assured her. "Frontier folk understand that sometimes the past is best left buried." Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering his words. What if it doesn't stay buried, Wade? What if Edmund comes looking for me? Wade straightened, his expression turning serious. Has there been word? Something you haven't told me? No, Victoria hastened to reassure him. Nothing like that, but I know him. His pride won't allow him to simply let me go. I'm his possession, his property. And Edmund Ainsworth doesn't relinquish what he considers his. Wade moved closer, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Victoria, look at me. She raised her eyes to his, finding them intent and unwavering in the moonlight. I meant what I said that first day. You're safe here. If he comes, Wade's jaw tightened, he'll have to go through me. And I'm not easily moved. The simple declaration, delivered without bravado but as a statement of absolute fact, should have frightened Victoria. Instead, she felt a wave of something else entirely, a warmth that had nothing to do with his jacket around her shoulders and everything to do with the man himself. I believe you, she whispered. For a moment, it seemed as if Wade might say something more, might even reach for her. But the door to the town hall opened, spilling light and music into the night as a group of revelers tumbled out, laughing and talking. The moment broken, Wade offered Victoria his arm. Shall we go back inside? I believe they are about to announce the pie contest winners and Mrs. Patterson might never forgive us if we miss her moment of glory. With a smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months, Victoria took his arm and allowed him to lead her back into the warmth and light of the celebration. Victoria's position at the school quickly became the anchor of her new life in Redemption Springs. Miss Thornton, impressed with her natural aptitude for teaching and her gentle yet firm way with the children, soon expanded her responsibilities to include instructing the younger girls in basic music appreciation and overseeing the weekly spelling competitions. The children, initially wary of the new teacher with her Eastern accent and refined manners, quickly warmed to her. Victoria found unexpected joy in their progress, little Annie Thompson finally mastering her letters, shy Joseph Miller finding his voice during recitation, the entire class beaming with pride when they successfully performed a simple song for their parents at the monthly school assembly. Wade came to that assembly, standing at the back of the room with his hat in his hands, his face breaking into a broad smile when Victoria looked up and saw him there. Afterward, he'd walked her back to Martha's, listening with genuine interest as she chattered excitedly about her pupils' accomplishments. You found your calling, he observed as they reached Martha's front gate. Those children adore you. Victoria flushed with pleasure. They're wonderful. Even Billy Sanderson, though he'd rather be anywhere than inside learning his figures. Billy's father runs the livery. Boy's been around horses since before he could walk. Probably doesn't see much use for book learning when all he wants is to follow in his pa's footsteps. Victoria considered this. Perhaps I need to find a way to connect what he loves with what he needs to learn. Show him that even a liveryman needs to read contracts and calculate feed costs. Wade's admiring look made her blush deepen. You're something special, Victoria Ainsworth. Do you know that? Before she could respond to this unexpected praise, Martha appeared at the door, calling them in for tea and effectively ending the moment. But later, alone in her room, Victoria replayed Wade's words and the warm look in his eyes, wondering at the fluttering sensation they produced in her chest. As September gave way to October, the mountains surrounding Redemption Springs blazed with autumn-color. Aspen groves turned to shimmering gold, scrub oak burnished to deep crimson, the sky an impossible blue against the riot of color. Wade, noting Victoria's delight in the changing season, suggested a Sunday picnic to properly appreciate the spectacle. Just a short ride, he promised. There's a meadow up near Broken Pine Creek with a view that'll take your breath away. Victoria hesitated. Since arriving in Redemption Springs, she hadn't ventured beyond the town limits. The wider world still held too many shadows, too many memories of her desperate flight from Denver. Seeing her uncertainty, Wade added gently, "Martha can come along if that would make you more comfortable." Victoria straightened her shoulders. "No, I'd like to go, just us." The decision, once made, felt right. "I can't hide in town forever, can I?" Wade's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'll arrange for a gentle mare from the livery. We'll leave after church." Sunday dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Victoria wore her sturdiest skirt and a warm shawl Martha had insisted on lending her. Wade arrived with 2 horses, his own sturdy gelding, and a placid dun mare that regarded Victoria with calm, liquid eyes. "This is Daisy," Wade introduced them. "Gentlest horse in Bill Sanderson's stable. Even lets the children ride her in circles during the 4th of July celebrations." Victoria approached the mare cautiously, holding out her hand for the horse to sniff. Daisy nickered softly, her velvet muzzle tickling Victoria's palm. "Hello, beautiful girl," Victoria murmured. Wade watched the exchange with approval. "You've handled horses before." "My father kept a pair for our carriage in Philadelphia," Victoria explained, stroking Daisy's neck. "I used to sneak them treats from the kitchen until our cook threatened to tell my mother." Wade laughed, the sound rich and unrestrained. "A rebel from the start, I see." With Wade's assistance, Victoria mounted Daisy, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible over the side saddle. Wade secured a canvas bag containing their picnic lunch to his saddle before swinging up onto his own mount with practiced ease. "Ready?" he asked, gathering his reins. Victoria nodded, taking a deep breath. "Lead on, Mr. Norton." They rode at an easy pace out of town, following a well-worn trail that wound gently upward into the foothills. Wade pointed out landmarks along the way: the old Spanish mission ruins, the creek where the town drew its water, the distant peaks with names like Sentinel and Eagle's Rest. Victoria drank in the information and the scenery, feeling the tight knot of anxiety in her chest gradually unwind with each mile they traveled from Redemption Springs. The meadow, when they reached it, was everything Wade had promised. Nestled in a natural bowl between 2 ridges, it offered a panoramic view of the valley below and the mountains beyond, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Aspen trees ringed the clearing, their golden leaves shimmering and whispering in the gentle breeze. "Oh, Wade," Victoria breathed as they dismounted. "It's magnificent." Wade watched her face as she took in the vista, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Worth the ride. Worth every minute," she assured him, turning in a slow circle to absorb the beauty surrounding them. They secured the horses near a small stream that cut through one corner of the meadow. Then Wade spread a blanket on a patch of sun-warmed grass. From his saddlebag, he produced a feast that made Victoria laugh with delight: cold fried chicken, biscuits, apples, and a jar of honey. "Martha's contribution," he explained, holding up the honey. "Said no picnic was complete without something sweet." They ate companionably, talking easily about the town, the approaching winter, Victoria's pupils. It struck Victoria how comfortable she'd become in Wade's presence, how the silences between them never felt awkward or strained. After they'd eaten, Wade leaned back on his elbows, his face tilted toward the sun. "I come up here sometimes when the ranch work allows, to think, to remember what matters." Victoria pulled her shawl more closely around her shoulders as a cool breeze rustled the aspen leaves. "And what matters to Wade Norton?" He considered her question with the same thoughtful attention he gave to everything. "Honesty. A day's work well done. Keeping your word." He glanced at her. protecting those who need protecting. Victoria felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. Those are good things to value. Wade sat up, picking a stem of grass to twirl between his fingers. What about you? What matters to Victoria Ainsworth? The question caught her off guard. For so long, her existence had been defined by survival, by Edmund's moods and demands, by the constant vigilance required to avoid his displeasure. What did she value for herself? Kindness, she said finally. I think that's at the heart of everything worthwhile. And freedom, the freedom to choose one's own path. She looked out over the vast landscape spread before them. I'm still learning what matters to me. Edmund didn't leave much room for my own thoughts or desires. Wade's expression darkened at the mention of her husband, as it always did. That man didn't deserve you. No, Victoria agreed softly. He didn't, but it took me too long to realize that. She plucked a wildflower from beside the blanket, twirling it much as Wade was doing with his grass stem. I believed I could fix him, heal whatever broken thing inside him made him so cruel. I thought if I was just patient enough, loving enough, he would change. Wade was quiet for a moment. That's not how it works with men like that, he said finally. The broken thing inside them is too deep, too twisted. It's not about the woman at all. It's about power, about control. Victoria looked at him curiously. You sound like you speak from knowledge. Wade's jaw tightened. My uncle was like your Edmund, beat my aunt regularly. Everyone knew, but no one did anything. It was family business, they said. His voice held old anger, old helplessness. She died from it eventually. Internal bleeding they couldn't stop. He claimed she fell down the stairs. I'm so sorry, Victoria whispered, understanding now some of the fierce protectiveness Wade had shown her from the beginning. I was 14, too young to do anything but hate him. Wade tossed aside the grass stem. Swore then I'd never stand by and watch something like that happen again. Victoria reached across the blanket and placed her hand over his. You're a good man, Wade Norton. He looked down at their hands, then turned his palm up to clasp her fingers gently. I try to be, don't always succeed. They sat like that, hands joined, as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. In that peaceful moment, with the majesty of the mountains spread before them and Wade's solid presence beside her, Victoria felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the final chains of fear that had bound her since fleeing Denver. As if reading her thoughts, Wade squeezed her hand gently. We should head back before we lose the light. The ride back to town was filled with a comfortable silence, both of them absorbing the day's quiet revelations. As they approached Redemption Springs, the church bell tolled the hour, its clear notes carrying across the valley. Victoria turned to Wade, illuminated in the golden light of the setting sun. Thank you for today, for all of it. His answering smile held a warmth that reached all the way to his eyes. My pleasure, Miss Ainsworth. Entirely my pleasure. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, Victoria settled more firmly into her life in Redemption Springs. Miss Thornton, impressed with her dedication and skill, offered her a permanent position at the school with a small but steady salary that allowed Victoria to begin repaying Martha's generosity and saving for a place of her own. Wade remained a constant presence, escorting her to church on Sundays, stopping by the schoolhouse occasionally to help with repairs or to deliver a rabbit or grouse for Martha's dinner table. Their friendship deepened with each shared conversation, each small kindness, each moment of understanding that passed between them. October gave way to November, bringing the first significant snowfall of the season. Victoria stood at the window of the schoolhouse during lunch break, watching fat flakes drift from a leaden sky, when Miss Thornton approached with a worried expression. "This storm's moving in faster than expected," the older woman said, peering at the rapidly whitening landscape. "We should send the children home while the roads are still passable." By the time the last pupil had been bundled into warm clothes and sent off with dire warnings to go straight home, the snow was falling in earnest, obscuring visibility beyond a few yards. Victoria and Miss Thornton stood on the schoolhouse porch, contemplating the weather. "You'll never make it back to Martha's in this," Miss Thornton declared. "You'll stay with me tonight. I'm just across the street." Victoria was about to accept the sensible offer when a familiar figure on horseback materialized through the swirling snow. "Wade," she called in surprise as he reined his horse to a stop at the hitching post. "Thought you might need an escort," he said, dismounting. His hat and shoulders were already covered with snow, his face ruddy from the cold. "Mr. Norton, you're a godsend," Miss Thornton said. "I was just telling Victoria she'd have to stay with me tonight." Wade stamped his boots to clear the snow. "No need for that, Miss Thornton. I've got the wagon with the canvas cover. We'll make it to Martha's without trouble." The older woman looked skeptical but nodded. "Be careful, both of you. This storm has a mean look to it." Wade helped Victoria into her coat, his movements efficient but gentle. "Ready." Outside, Victoria was startled to see not just Wade's horse but a sturdy wagon with a canvas top pulled up behind the schoolhouse. "You came prepared," she observed as he helped her climb onto the high seat. Wade secured a heavy blanket around her legs before moving around to the driver's side. "Been watching the weather all day. Those clouds have been threatening since dawn." He took up the reins, clicking to the team of draft horses. "Besides, I promised Martha I'd bring back supplies from the mercantile. 2 birds, 1 stone." The journey to Martha's normally took less than 10 minutes on foot, but with the snow rapidly accumulating and visibility poor, it seemed to stretch endlessly. Wade handled the team expertly, his focus absolute as he navigated the increasingly treacherous streets. "You're very good at this," Victoria observed, clutching the seat as the wagon slid slightly before the horses found their footing again. Wade's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Had lots of practice. Drove supply wagons during the war." Victoria looked at him in surprise. Wade rarely spoke of his past, and he'd never mentioned military service. "You fought in the war, last year of it," he confirmed, eyes still on the road. "Lied about my age to enlist. Ended up driving wagons instead of fighting, which likely saved my fool neck." His expression turned grim. "Saw enough death to last a lifetime anyway." Before Victoria could respond, the wagon lurched sharply as one wheel dropped into a hidden rut. Wade cursed under his breath, steadying the frightened horses with practiced hands and soothing words. But as he turned to check on Victoria, his concerned eyes met hers in the dim light beneath the canvas, and something passed between them, a current of awareness, of connection deeper than words. The moment was broken by their arrival at Martha's gate. Wade jumped down to help Victoria from the high seat, his hands strong and sure at her waist as he lifted her to the ground. For a heartbeat after her feet touched earth, his hands remained, warm through the layers of her coat. "Thank you for coming for me," Victoria said softly, looking up at him through snowflakes that clung to her lashes. Wade's eyes, blue as summer skies in his winter-reddened face, held hers. "Always," he replied simply. Martha's door opened, spilling golden lamplight into the snowy twilight. "Lord have mercy. Get in here before you both catch your death," the older woman called, breaking the spell between them. With a rueful smile, Wade released Victoria and turned back to his team. "Best get these supplies unloaded and the horses to shelter before this gets any worse." Later that night, As the wind howled around the eaves of Martha's snug house and the snow continued to fall, Victoria sat by the fire, a cup of hot cider warming her hands. Her thoughts kept returning to that moment with Wade, to the look in his eyes, to the single word he'd spoken with such certainty. Always. For the first time since fleeing Denver, Victoria allowed herself to truly contemplate a future beyond mere survival, a future that might include love, might include Wade. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Edmund still existed. Their marriage still bound her, legally if not in her heart, and if he found her. "Penny for your thoughts," Martha said, settling into the chair opposite with her own cup of cider. "Though from that frown they might not be worth that much." Victoria smiled weakly. "Just wool gathering." Martha's shrewd eyes saw more than Victoria was comfortable revealing. "Wool gathering about a certain tall cowboy, I'd wager." Heat rose in Victoria's cheeks. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes," Martha replied dryly. "The man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars, and you're not far behind in your regard for him." Victoria stared into the flames, unable to deny the truth in Martha's words. "It's complicated, Martha. Because of your husband back east." When Victoria looked up in shock, Martha shook her head. "Child, I've known since the day Wade brought you to my door. Not the details, mind you, but enough. A woman recognizes certain kinds of bruises, certain kinds of fear." She leaned forward. "What I don't know is whether you've told Wade the full truth." Victoria's hands tightened around her cup. "He knows I'm married. He knows Edmund was cruel. Does he know you're still legally bound to that man, that in the eyes of the law you're committing adultery even thinking about another?" "We haven't. There's nothing." Victoria stammered. Martha's expression softened. "Not yet. But it's coming, sure as spring follows winter, and Wade Norton deserves to know exactly what he's walking into." Victoria knew Martha was right. Wade had been nothing but honest with her, offering his protection and gradually his heart with no conditions, no reservations. She owed him the complete truth about Edmund, about the legal entanglements that still bound her, about the danger that might follow if Edmund ever discovered her whereabouts. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving Redemption Springs transformed into a glittering white wonderland. School was canceled for the day, the roads being too difficult for the younger children to navigate safely. Victoria had just finished helping Martha clear the breakfast dishes when a knock came at the door. Wade stood on the porch, his breath clouding in the frigid air, a bundle of firewood in his arms. "Thought you might need this," he said by way of greeting. "Storm brought down some branches on Miller's property. Frank sent a crew of us to clear them, so there's plenty to go around." Martha welcomed him inside, directing him to stack the wood by the hearth. "You're a thoughtful man, Wade Norton." "I was just telling Victoria I needed to send for more fuel before the next storm hits." After the wood was stacked, and Martha had pressed a cup of hot coffee into Wade's hands, the older woman made a show of remembering an errand. "I promised Harriet Patterson I'd help her with the quilt for the church raffle," she announced. "Will you two be all right on your own for a few hours?" Victoria recognized the transparent attempt to give them privacy, but felt a rush of gratitude for Martha's tact. "We'll be fine, Martha. Take your time." After Martha had bundled up and departed, a slightly awkward silence fell between Victoria and Wade. They sat across from each other at Martha's kitchen table, steam rising from their coffee cups. "How are the roads?" Victoria asked finally, grasping for a neutral topic. "Passable for horses and wagons on the main streets," Wade replied. "Side roads are still pretty deep. The schoolchildren will enjoy an unexpected holiday, I expect." Victoria smiled at the thought of her pupil's delight. Billy Sanderson certainly will. He's been watching the clouds for days, praying for snow. Wade chuckled, then grew more serious. Victoria, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Her pulse quickened. Yes, Christmas is coming in a few weeks, he began, turning his cup between his hands. Frank Miller always gives the hands a few days off around the holiday. I was thinking of riding up to my cabin, spending some time there. He glanced up, meeting her eyes. I'd like it if you'd come with me, just for the day, he added hastily, to see the place, maybe have Christmas dinner there. The invitation hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Victoria knew that accepting would signal a shift in their relationship, a step beyond the careful boundaries they'd maintained. Wade, she began slowly, before I answer, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you fully before now. He straightened, his expression growing concerned. What is it? Victoria took a deep breath. You know I'm married, that I ran from Edmund because of his cruelty. At Wade's nod, she continued. What I haven't explained is that our marriage is still legally binding. In the eyes of the law, I'm a runaway wife. If Edmund found me, he would have every right to force me to return to Denver. Wade's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. There's more, Victoria said, forcing herself to meet his steady gaze. Edmund is a powerful man in Denver banking circles. He has connections, resources. If he's looking for me, and I believe he is, it's only a matter of time before his inquiries lead here. Has there been word? Wade asked, echoing his question from a few weeks earlier. Some sign he's getting close, Victoria shook her head. No, nothing specific, but I know him, Wade. His pride won't allow him to simply let me disappear. I'm his possession, his property. She swallowed hard. And when he finds me, he'll punish anyone who helped me, especially a man he believes has taken what belongs to him. Wade's expression darkened. You don't belong to anyone, Victoria. You're not property to be owned. The law says otherwise, she replied softly. A husband has rights over his wife that supersede almost everything else. Wade was quiet for a long moment, absorbing her words. Finally, he reached across the table and took her hand. Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with the full truth. Relief washed through Victoria. You're not angry that I didn't tell you everything from the beginning. You told me what you could when you could, Wade said simply. The rest doesn't change anything for me. It should, Victoria insisted. Wade, if you continue to associate with me to care for me, you're putting yourself at risk. Edmund is dangerous when crossed. A small, hard smile touched Wade's lips. I'm not exactly defenseless, Victoria. I know that, she said, squeezing his hand. But I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. Wade's blue eyes held hers, unwavering. Listen to me. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. I'm not afraid of Edmund Ainsworth or any other man who thinks he can own another human being. The conviction in his voice, the steady pressure of his hand on hers, gave Victoria courage. Then yes, she said softly. I would very much like to see your cabin, to spend Christmas Day with you. The smile that broke across Wade's face was like sunshine after storm clouds. I'll make it a day you won't forget, he promised. As he left a short while later, Victoria watched him stride through the snow, his tall figure straight and sure against the white landscape. For the first time in longer than she could remember, hope bloomed fully in her heart, not the cautious, tentative hope of survival, but the expansive, joyful hope of a future worth living. The days leading up to Christmas passed in a flurry of activity. The school term ended with a small pageant where Victoria's youngest pupils recited poems and sang carols to the delight of their parents. The town of Redemption Springs transformed itself with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and handmade decorations in every window. Martha's kitchen became a constant source of mouth-watering aromas as she baked cookies, pies, and fruitcakes to distribute among friends and neighbors. Victoria found herself caught up in the genuine warmth and community spirit of the season, so different from the formal, often cold social obligations that had marked the holidays in her previous life. She helped decorate the church, taught her pupils to make paper snowflakes for the schoolroom windows, and even joined a group of townswomen in caroling one clear, cold evening. Throughout it all, Wade remained her steadfast companion, finding reasons to be in town almost daily despite the winter weather and his duties at the ranch. He brought Martha firewood, helped the blacksmith repair the church bell that had cracked in the cold, and appeared like clockwork, each evening to escort Victoria to whatever festive activity was planned. 2 days before Christmas, Wade arrived at Martha's with a small pine tree strapped to his saddle. "Thought you ladies might like some greenery inside," he said, carrying the fragrant tree into Martha's parlor. "It's perfect," Victoria exclaimed, clapping her hands in delight. "We have some ornaments packed away, don't we, Martha?" The older woman nodded, already moving toward the storage chest beneath the stairs. "And I have popcorn we can string, just like when I was a girl." That evening, the three of them decorated the tree, hanging Martha's cherished glass ornaments carefully wrapped in soft cloth and transported west decades earlier alongside strings of cranberries and popcorn, paper stars folded by Victoria, and small carved wooden animals Wade produced from his pocket with an almost embarrassed air. "Did you make these?" Victoria asked, turning a delicately carved deer in her fingers. Wade nodded, his usual confidence momentarily replaced by uncertainty. "Just whittling to pass the time on night watch. Nothing fancy." "They're beautiful," Victoria said sincerely, hanging the deer on a prominent branch. "You have an artist's hands, Wade Norton." Color rose in his cheeks at her praise, and Martha, observing from across the room, smiled knowingly to herself. When the tree was decorated to everyone's satisfaction, Martha produced a bottle of blackberry wine she'd been saving for a special occasion. They toasted the season, the tree, and each other, the sweet wine warming Victoria from the inside out, or perhaps it was the way Wade looked at her over the rim of his glass, his eyes reflecting the twinkling candles on the tree. Later, as Wade prepared to leave, he handed Victoria a small package wrapped in brown paper. "A Christmas gift," he explained, "for when you come to the cabin." Victoria took the package, feeling its solid weight. "But I haven't anything for you," she protested. Wade smiled, touching her cheek briefly with one calloused finger. "You being there will be gift enough." After he'd gone, Victoria stood in Martha's parlor, holding the package and trying to calm the wild flutter of her heart. Whatever happened at Wade's cabin on Christmas Day, she knew with absolute certainty that her life would never be the same afterward. Christmas morning dawned clear and bracingly cold, the sun transforming the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling expanse of diamond-like sparkles. Victoria dressed carefully in her warmest clothes, a forest green wool skirt Martha had helped her remake from one of her own, a cream-colored blouse, and a matching green jacket with a fur collar that had been a surprise gift from the townswoman the previous evening. "You can't go courting a handsome cowboy without proper attire," Martha had said with a wink as Victoria unwrapped the beautiful garment. "It's not courting," Victoria had protested weakly. "Just Christmas dinner." Martha's knowing look had spoken volumes. "Whatever you say, dear." Now, as Victoria pinned her hair up and checked her appearance one final time, she admitted to herself that this was indeed more than a simple holiday meal between friends. The attraction between her and Wade had been building steadily for months, transcending her initial fear and his protective instincts to become something deeper, richer, more complex. She touched the small package Wade had given her, tucked safely in her pocket. Whatever it contained, she knew it represented a declaration of sorts. Today, she would make her own declaration in return that despite the legal constraints still binding her to Edmond, her heart had made its choice. Wade arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, driving a sleigh borrowed from the Miller Ranch, complete with bells that jingled merrily as the horses pranced in the snow. He wore a new shirt under his heavy coat, Victoria noticed, and had trimmed his beard to neat precision. After exchanging Christmas greetings with Martha and promising to have Victoria home before dark, Wade helped her into the sleigh, tucking warm blankets around her legs before taking his place beside her and gathering the reins. "Ready for an adventure, Miss Ainsworth?" he asked, his breath clouding in the crisp air. Victoria smiled up at him, her earlier nervousness replaced by a sense of rightness, of inevitability. "Lead on, Mr. Norton." The journey to Wade's cabin took them northwest of town, following the creek for several miles before turning onto a smaller trail that wound up into the foothills. Victoria marveled at the pristine beauty surrounding them, untouched snowdrifts sculpted by the wind, skeletal trees etched against the brilliant blue sky, occasional wildlife tracks crossing their path. "There it is," Wade said finally, gesturing with his chin toward a structure that appeared as they rounded a bend. Victoria had been expecting a rough shelter, perhaps a one-room shack like many of the bachelor accommodations she'd heard described in town. Instead, she saw a sturdy log cabin nestled against a rocky outcrop, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A covered porch wrapped around two sides, and glass windows, a luxury in this remote location, gleamed in the winter sun. "Wade, it's beautiful," she breathed as he reined the horses to a stop before the cabin. He looked pleased at her reaction. "Built it myself, over the first 2 summers I was working for Frank Miller. Added the porch and the extra room last year." He jumped down from the sleigh and came around to help her descend. "It's not much, but it's mine, free and clear." The pride in his voice touched Victoria. This place represented security, independence, achievement, things Wade clearly valued deeply. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly spacious and meticulously maintained. The main room featured a large stone fireplace where a welcoming blaze already burned, comfortable-looking furniture crafted from local timber, and shelves lined with books that made Victoria's eyebrows rise in surprise. Wade noticed her reaction. "My mother's collection," he explained. "One of the few things I brought west with me." "It's wonderful," Victoria said sincerely, turning in a slow circle to take in the rest of the cabin, the small but functional kitchen area with its cast iron stove, the doorway leading to what must be the second room, the colorful braided rug covering most of the plank floor. "All of it is wonderful, Wade." He removed his coat and hung it on a peg by the door, then took Victoria's to do the same. "Make yourself comfortable while I see to the horses," he instructed. "Won't take but a few minutes." Left alone, Victoria explored the cabin more thoroughly, noting the personal touches that spoke of Wade's character: a carefully mended quilt draped over the back of a rocking chair, a collection of interesting stones and pine cones arranged on the mantel, a drawing of a farmhouse framed on one wall that must be his childhood home. Everything was simple but well crafted, practical yet showing an appreciation for beauty that many might not expect from a rough-hewn cowboy. When Wade returned, stamping snow from his boots, Victoria was examining his bookshelves, a volume of Whitman's poetry in her hands. "Find anything interesting?" he asked, moving to stir the fire. Victoria smiled, returning the book to its place. Many things. You're a man of hidden depths, Wade Norton. He chuckled, a touch of self-consciousness in the sound. Not so hidden. Just not much call for poetry discussions during cattle drives. They fell into easy conversation as Wade prepared their Christmas meal, a plump goose he'd hunted himself, potatoes, carrots and parsnips from the root cellar beneath the cabin, and an apple pie that he admitted somewhat sheepishly had been made by Martha and secretly passed to him the previous day. Victoria insisted on helping, peeling vegetables while Wade prepared the goose, the domestic partnership feeling so natural it made her heart ache with longing. This could be their life, simple tasks shared, conversation flowing easily, the comfort of each other's presence in this beautiful, isolated haven. As they worked, Wade told her about his plans for the cabin, a larger garden come spring, perhaps another room someday, a better roof before next winter. Victoria listened, hearing the future in his words, understanding that he was showing her not just his home but his dreams. When the meal was ready, they sat across from each other at Wade's sturdy table, the savory aroma of roast goose filling the cabin. Wade reached for her hand before they began eating. "I'd like to say grace," he said, surprising her again with this glimpse of a faith he rarely mentioned. Victoria placed her hand in his, bowing her head as he spoke simple words of gratitude for the food, for the day, for their safety and health. He didn't mention her specifically, but his fingers tightened momentarily around hers when he thanked God for unexpected blessings, and Victoria felt tears prick behind her closed eyelids. The meal was delicious, the conversation warm and easy. They spoke of the town, of Victoria's pupils, of books they had both read, of the changing seasons in this mountain country that Wade loved so deeply. As they lingered over slices of Martha's perfect apple pie, Victoria realized she had never felt so completely at home, so utterly herself, as she did in this cabin with this man. As the winter afternoon light began to fade, Wade built up the fire and they moved to sit before it, Victoria in the rocking chair, Wade on a low stool nearby. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional distant call of a bird. "I should probably get you back to town soon," Wade said finally, though his tone suggested reluctance. "I promised Martha before dark." Victoria nodded, equally reluctant for this perfect day to end. "Before we go, I'd like to open your gift," she said, removing the small package from her pocket. Wade nodded, watching intently as she carefully unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a carved wooden box, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand, its lid inlaid with a delicate pattern of stars. "It's beautiful," Victoria murmured, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "Open it," Wade urged softly. Victoria lifted the lid to find a silver locket nestled on a bed of soft cloth. The locket was simple but elegant, oval-shaped with a floral design etched into its surface. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted it from the box. "It was my mother's," Wade explained, his voice low. "My father gave it to her on their wedding day. It's the one fine thing she owned and cherished." Victoria looked up at him, understanding the significance of such a gift. "Wade, I can't possibly open it," he said again, gently cutting off her protest. With careful fingers, Victoria pressed the tiny clasp. The locket sprang open to reveal not the expected portraits or lock of hair, but a small piece of folded paper. Puzzled, she removed it and unfolded it to find a message written in Wade's strong, clear hand. "Until you smile again, and every day after." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she looked up to find Wade kneeling before her, his face solemn yet filled with such tenderness it made her breath catch. "Victoria," he began, taking her free hand in both of his, "I know there are complications. I know there are obstacles that seem insurmountable, but I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day when you looked at me with those empty eyes and I swore to myself I'd see them filled with joy again." A tear slipped down Victoria's cheek. "Wade, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for promises you can't give. I'm not asking you to disregard the legal bonds that still exist. I'm just asking for the truth of your heart and offering the truth of mine in return." Victoria clutched the locket tightly, feeling its edges press into her palm. "My heart is yours," she whispered. "It has been for longer than I've been able to admit, even to myself." Wade's face transformed with joy, years seeming to fall away as he smiled. "Then the rest we'll figure out together, one day at a time." He rose slightly, still kneeling but now at a height where his face was level with hers. With infinite gentleness, he cupped her cheek with one hand. "May I kiss you, Victoria, just once to seal this moment?" Unable to speak past the emotion closing her throat, Victoria nodded, leaning toward him as his lips met hers in a kiss so tender it brought fresh tears to her eyes. It was brief, chaste even, but it contained a promise more binding than any legal document, any formal vow. As they drew apart, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever comes," he murmured, "whatever we have to face, we face it together. You're not alone anymore." Victoria closed her eyes, savoring the moment, committing it to memory. "Together," she echoed, a vow of her own. The journey back to town was silent but companionable, both of them wrapped in the warmth of their shared feelings despite the deepening chill of the winter evening. Wade drove the sleigh with one hand, the other firmly holding Victoria's beneath the blankets. Occasionally he would glance at her, a smile of such perfect contentment on his face that it made her heart swell with answering joy. At Martha's door, Wade helped Victoria down from the sleigh, holding her perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you for today," he said softly. "Best Christmas I've ever had." Victoria smiled up at him, conscious of Martha probably watching through the curtains. "For me as well." Wade touched her cheek briefly, then stepped back. "I'll come by tomorrow if that's all right. I'll be waiting," Victoria promised. As she entered Martha's warm house, the older woman took one look at her face and smiled knowingly. "Told you it wasn't just Christmas dinner," she said, but there was no teasing in her tone, only genuine happiness. That night, as Victoria prepared for bed, she carefully hung the locket around her neck, its weight against her skin a tangible reminder of Wade's love and his promise. Whatever the future held, even if it included the shadow of Edmund Ainsworth, she would face it with courage, with hope, and with the knowledge that she was no longer alone. The new year of 1879 arrived with a bitter cold snap that froze the creek solid and kept most of Redemption Springs residents close to their hearths. School reopened after the holiday break, but attendance was sporadic as families struggled with impassable roads and the constant battle against the elements. Victoria's relationship with Wade deepened during these harsh winter weeks, their stolen moments together all the more precious for their rarity. Wade's duties at the ranch kept him busy from dawn until dusk most days, but he still managed to visit town at least twice a week, often staying for supper at Martha's and lingering afterward to talk with Victoria beside the fire. They were careful to maintain propriety in public, limiting their displays of affection to the occasional brush of hands or meaningful glance. But in private, during those brief moments when Martha discreetly found reasons to leave them alone, they allowed themselves the luxury of honest words and tender touches, his hand cradling her face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, their foreheads touching as they spoke of dreams and possibilities. The locket never left Victoria's neck, though she kept it hidden beneath her high collars, a private talisman against fear and doubt. February brought a temporary thaw, and with it increased activity in town as supplies that had been delayed by winter weather finally arrived from Denver. Victoria was helping Martha carry parcels from the general store when she noticed an unfamiliar man posting a notice on the town bulletin board outside the sheriff's office. Something about his city clothes and officious manner sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter air. Instinctively, she turned away, keeping her face hidden as they passed. "What is it?" Martha asked, noticing her sudden tension. "That man," Victoria whispered. "By the sheriff's office. I don't recognize him." Martha glanced casually in the direction Victoria indicated. "Looks like a lawyer or maybe a bank man from his clothes. Probably hear about the new rail spur they're talking about putting through next year." Victoria nodded, forcing herself to continue walking at a normal pace despite the urge to run. "You're probably right." But later, after Martha had gone to her quilting circle, Victoria slipped back to the bulletin board, her heart pounding as she approached the freshly posted notice. Her worst fears were confirmed when she saw her own face staring back at her from a woodcut illustration beneath bold letters that proclaimed, "Missing woman Victoria Ainsworth, née Hollister." Reward offered. The text below described her in detail: height, build, hair and eye color, and stated that she had wandered away from her home in Denver while in a state of mental confusion following an illness. Anyone with information was instructed to contact Edmund Ainsworth, Esquire, care of the First Bank of Denver. Victoria tore the notice from the board with trembling hands, crumpling it into her pocket as she hurried back to Martha's house. Her mind raced. The man posting the notice might still be in town. If anyone had recognized her from the illustration, she needed to find Wade. As if summoned by her thoughts, Wade appeared at Martha's door an hour later, his face grave. "You've seen it?" he asked without preamble as she let him in. Victoria nodded, producing the crumpled notice from her pocket. "There may be others." Wade took the paper, his jaw tightening as he read it. "Mental confusion," he growled. "The man's a snake." "He's covering his tracks," Victoria said, pacing nervously. "Making it seem like I'm unstable, so if I try to speak about what really happened." "No one would believe you," Wade finished, crushing the notice in his fist. "Clever and damning." Victoria stopped her pacing, facing Wade directly. "I have to leave Redemption Springs." Wade's head snapped up. "What? No." "I have to," Victoria insisted, her voice breaking. "The illustration is good enough that someone will recognize me eventually, and when they do, they'll remember you, how often we're together. Edmund will know and he'll." Wade crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her by the shoulders. "Listen to me. Running again solves nothing. Where would you go? How would you live? You'd be alone, vulnerable." His eyes searched hers intently. "We face this together, remember." "I can't risk your safety," Victoria whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "You don't know Edmund, what he's capable of." "I know men like him," Wade countered grimly. "And I know myself better. I won't let him hurt you again, Victoria. Ever." Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. They froze, exchanging alarmed glances. "Victoria, you in there?" Martha's voice called. "I've brought Sheriff Taylor to see you." Wade squeezed Victoria's shoulders reassuringly. "It's all right. Ben Taylor's a good man. If anyone in town can help us, it's him." With a deep breath, Victoria nodded, and Wade opened the door to admit Martha and the sheriff, a weather-beaten man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Miss Ainsworth," the sheriff greeted her, removing his hat. I think we need to have a conversation about the notices being posted around town." Victoria's heart sank. "You've seen them?" Sheriff Taylor nodded. "Along with a letter from a Mr. Edmund Ainsworth of Denver requesting my assistance in locating his confused and vulnerable wife." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Thing is, in my experience, women who run from their husbands usually have good reason, and it ain't confusion." Hope flared in Victoria's chest. "You don't believe him," the sheriff snorted. "Been doing this job too long to take a fancy letter at face value. Besides, I've seen you around town these past months, teaching the children, helping at church functions. You seem plenty clear-headed to me." He glanced at Wade. "And I know Norton here wouldn't be sweet on a woman who wasn't of sound mind." Wade cleared his throat, looking slightly embarrassed but not denying the sheriff's assertion. "What happens now?" Victoria asked, her voice steadier. Sheriff Taylor settled his substantial frame into one of Martha's kitchen chairs. "That depends on you, Miss Ainsworth. If you tell me you're here of your own free will, that you left Denver for reasons you believed necessary, I have no legal obligation to report your whereabouts to anyone." "And if her husband comes looking himself?" Wade asked. The sheriff's expression hardened. "That's trickier. Legally, a husband has certain rights. But," he looked directly at Victoria, "if there's evidence of mistreatment, if you were in fear for your safety, that changes things. Colorado territory has laws against excessive cruelty, even between husband and wife." Victoria's hand unconsciously rose to her throat where the locket lay hidden. "There's evidence," she said quietly, "physical and otherwise." Sheriff Taylor nodded solemnly. "Then my advice is this: stay put. Continue your life here. I'll quietly remove these notices when I see them, but if this Edmund Ainsworth shows up in Redemption Springs, you'll need to be prepared to state your case, publicly if necessary." The thought made Victoria's stomach clench with fear, but she nodded. "I understand." "And one more thing," the sheriff added, rising to leave. "Whatever is between you two," he gestured between Victoria and Wade, "keep it discreet until this situation is resolved. Don't give Ainsworth any more ammunition than he already has." After the sheriff departed, Martha excused herself to prepare supper, leaving Victoria and Wade alone in the parlor. "Are you all right?" Wade asked softly, taking her hands in his. Victoria drew a shaky breath. "I think so." Sheriff Taylor's reaction was unexpected. "Ben's a fair man. Sees beyond the letter of the law to its spirit." Wade's thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "And he's right. We need to be careful, at least for now." Victoria looked up at him, fear and love warring in her heart. "This isn't what you signed up for, Wade. All this secrecy, this legal entanglement. I would understand if—" "Stop right there," Wade interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "I knew exactly what I was signing up for when I gave you my mother's locket. I knew you were still legally married. I knew there might be complications." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "None of that changed how I felt then. None of it changes how I feel now." Victoria leaned forward until her forehead rested against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. "What do we do now?" Wade's arms came around her, holding her close. "We live our lives. We teach children, tend cattle, attend church on Sundays. And we wait." His voice took on a harder edge. "If Edmund Ainsworth wants to find you, let him come to Redemption Springs. Let him face me, face this community that's come to care for you." Victoria looked up, seeing the determination in Wade's face. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not just of Edmund, but of what might happen to you if he comes." Wade touched her cheek gently. "I can take care of myself, Victoria. And I promise you this, whatever happens, you will never have to face that man alone again." In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of Martha's home and the strength of Wade's arms, Victoria allowed herself to believe that promise might be enough. March arrived with warming temperatures, and the first tentative signs of spring crocuses pushing through melting snow, longer daylight hours, the return of birds from their winter migrations. Victoria threw herself into her teaching with renewed vigor, determined to live fully despite the shadow hanging over her. Wade, true to his word, remained steadfast. They were careful, as Sheriff Taylor had advised, limiting their time alone together and maintaining a proper distance in public. But their feelings, far from diminishing under this pressure, only seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. On the first truly warm Saturday of spring, Victoria sat on Martha's porch, grading spelling papers and enjoying the sunshine when a rider appeared at the end of the street. Something about his posture, the set of his shoulders, made her look up sharply. The papers slid from her lap as she stood, her blood turning to ice in her veins. Edmund Ainsworth had found her. He rode directly to Martha's gate, his expensive thoroughbred a stark contrast to the sturdy local horses tied at hitching posts along the street. As he dismounted, Victoria took an involuntary step backward, her hand closing around the locket beneath her dress. "Victoria," Edmund called, his voice carrying that familiar cultured tone that had once charmed her. "My dear, I've been so worried." She said nothing, frozen in place as he opened the gate and started up the path. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a polished way, his dark hair neatly combed, his clothes impeccably tailored. Only his eyes betrayed him, cold and calculating despite the concerned expression he had arranged on his features. "You've led me on quite a chase," he continued, mounting the porch steps. "But it's time to come home now. Your confusion has clearly passed." Victoria found her voice at last. "I'm not confused, Edmund. I left deliberately. I'm not coming back with you." A flash of anger crossed his face before he controlled it, glancing around as if suddenly aware they might have an audience. Several people had stopped on the street, watching the scene with undisguised curiosity. "Let's discuss this inside, shall we?" Edmund suggested, his tone hardening slightly. "This isn't a conversation for public consumption." "We have nothing to discuss," Victoria replied, straightening her spine. "Please leave." Edmund's facade of concern slipped further, his mouth tightening. "You are my wife," he said, emphasizing each word. "Legally bound to me before God and the law, you will come home and fulfill your duties." "Your wife, yes. Your property, no." Victoria was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I will not return to Denver with you, Edmund. Not today, not ever." Edmund took a step toward her, his eyes darkening dangerously. "Don't test me, Victoria. You know what happens when you defy me." "Is there a problem here?" Wade's voice came from behind Edmund, calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. Victoria's heart leapt at the sight of him standing at the bottom of the porch steps, his stance relaxed but alert, his hand resting casually near the revolver at his hip. Edmund turned, assessing Wade with a quick, dismissive glance. "This is a private matter between a man and his wife." "It doesn't concern you, Cowboy." "That's where you're wrong, Ainsworth," Wade replied evenly. "Anything that concerns Miss Victoria concerns me directly." Edmund's eyes narrowed as he looked between them, understanding dawning on his face. "I see," he said softly, his voice taking on a dangerous silkiness. "So this is why you ran, Victoria. To play whore to some saddle tramp," the crude words, so at odds with Edmund's usual facade of gentility, revealed the true nature that Victoria had come to know all too well during their marriage. But before she could respond, Martha appeared in the doorway behind her. "That's quite enough of that kind of talk on my property," the older woman declared firmly. Victoria is a guest in my home and a respected teacher in this community. I'll thank you to address her with appropriate respect, sir." Edmund's face flushed with anger at being chastised by someone he clearly considered beneath his notice. "This doesn't concern you either, madam. I'm here to collect my wife, who has been missing for months." "Not missing." Sheriff Taylor's voice joined the conversation as he approached from the street, having been alerted by the gathering crowd. "Just not wanting to be found. There's a difference." Edmund turned again, clearly frustrated by the growing number of people interfering with his plans. "Sheriff, I presume. I'm Edmund Ainsworth. I believe you received my letter regarding my wife's condition." The sheriff nodded, climbing the steps to stand beside Victoria. "I did. Also received some information that puts a different light on the situation." He looked at Victoria. "Miss Ainsworth, do you wish to return to Denver with your husband?" "No," Victoria said firmly. "I do not." "There you have it," Sheriff Taylor said to Edmund. "The lady has stated her preference." Edmund's veneer of civility was rapidly crumbling. "This is absurd. She is my wife. I have legal rights." "That you do," the sheriff agreed calmly. "You have the right to petition the court for her return. You have the right to file for divorce on grounds of abandonment if you choose. What you don't have is the right to force her to go anywhere against her will, especially not in my town." Edmund's gaze darted between the sheriff, Martha, and Wade, who had moved to stand at the bottom of the porch steps, directly in Edmund's path, should he try to approach Victoria again. The banker's face contorted with barely suppressed rage. "This isn't over," he said to Victoria, his voice low and threatening. "Not by a long shot." With that, he turned and descended the steps, brushing past Wade with deliberate force. Wade didn't move, his steady gaze following Edmund as he mounted his horse and rode away, back straight with indignation. In the silence that followed, Victoria found her legs suddenly unable to support her. She sank onto the porch swing, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "You did well," Sheriff Taylor said, patting her shoulder awkwardly. "Standing up to him like that." Victoria managed a weak smile. "Thank you for your support, Sheriff." "All of you," she added, looking at Martha and then at Wade, who had moved to stand at the top of the steps, concern etched on his face. "He'll be back," Wade said quietly. "Men like that don't give up easily." Sheriff Taylor nodded grimly. "Likely with a court order next time." "He'll try to use the law against you, Miss Ainsworth." "Then we'll fight him with the same weapons," Martha declared, her voice firm. "Victoria, it's time to tell your story, all of it, to people who can help." Victoria looked at her questioningly. "Judge Hollister arrives next week for the spring circuit court," the sheriff explained. "He's a fair man, takes a dim view of men who mistreat their wives. If you're willing to testify about your experiences with Ainsworth, we might convince the judge to grant you some form of protection." Wade stepped forward. "I know Judge Hollister from my time driving supply wagons during the war. He was a colonel then in charge of military justice for our regiment. He believed in evidence above all else." "Evidence?" Victoria repeated softly, her hand rising unconsciously to touch her ribs where they had once been broken under Edmund's fists. Martha's expression was gentle but determined. "The truth, Victoria. It's your strongest weapon now." That night, after Martha had gone to bed, Victoria sat with Wade on the porch, speaking in hushed tones as they planned their next steps. The encounter with Edmund had shaken her deeply, but it had also crystallized something within her, a determination not to be a victim again, not to let fear rule her life. "I'll speak to Judge Hollister," she decided finally. "I'll tell him everything." Wade took her hand, squeezing gently. "I'll be right beside you, every step." Victoria turned to look at him in the dim light from the parlor windows. Edmund won't stop, Wade. He'll use every resource, every connection he has. His pride won't allow him to lose, especially not to a woman he considers his property and a cowboy he sees as beneath him. Let him try, Wade said simply. Some things are worth fighting for, Victoria. His eyes held hers steadily. You're worth fighting for. Victoria leaned against his shoulder, drawing strength from his solid presence. I never thought I'd have the courage to face him again, she admitted. But when he was standing there, all I could think about was protecting what I've built here, my work, my friends. She looked up at Wade. My future. Wade's arm came around her, holding her close. You're the bravest person I know, he said softly, and whatever happens next, we face it together. As they sat in companionable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the velvet spring sky, Victoria realized that for the first time since fleeing Denver, she was not afraid of what tomorrow might bring. With Wade beside her and the support of people like Martha and Sheriff Taylor, she had found something Edmund could never take away: a sense of her own worth, her own strength. Edmund might have found her, but he would never possess her again. Of that, Victoria was absolutely certain. The next week passed in a flurry of preparation. Victoria wrote out a detailed account of her marriage to Edmund, sparing no detail of the physical and emotional abuse she had endured. Martha helped her organize her thoughts, while Sheriff Taylor advised her on which aspects would be most relevant from a legal standpoint. Wade rode out to his cabin and returned with a small metal box containing documents from his military service, including letters of commendation from Colonel, now Judge Hollister, that spoke to his character and reliability. Character witnesses, he explained when Victoria questioned the papers. If Edmund tries to paint me as some opportunistic drifter taking advantage of a vulnerable woman, these might help counter that narrative. The day before Judge Hollister was due to arrive, Edmund returned to Redemption Springs, this time with a lawyer from Denver in tow. They took rooms at the hotel and were seen consulting with several prominent businessmen in town, clearly attempting to gather support for Edmund's position. Word reached Victoria through Martha's extensive network of friends that Edmund was portraying himself as a devoted husband, devastated by his wife's mental fragility and subsequent flight. He spoke of unfortunate delusions that had taken hold during her illness, delusions that had led her to make unfounded accusations against him. He's laying the groundwork, Sheriff Taylor warned when he stopped by to update them. Trying to cast doubt on your sanity and credibility before you even speak to the judge. Victoria nodded, her resolve hardening. It's what I expected. Edmund always plans 3 moves ahead. So do we, Wade said firmly. I've sent for Dr. Higgins. He examined you when you first arrived, saw your injuries firsthand. His testimony will be valuable. Victoria looked at him in surprise. You thought of that? Wade's expression was grim. I've been thinking of nothing else since Edmund showed his face here. The next morning, Judge Hollister arrived on the stagecoach, a tall, imposing man with steel-gray hair and piercing eyes that seemed to take in everything at a glance. He greeted Sheriff Taylor warmly, before being escorted to the rooms above the courthouse, where circuit judges traditionally stayed during their visits. Court was scheduled to begin the following day, with regular cases, land disputes, minor criminal matters, business conflicts taking up most of the morning. Victoria's petition for protection was set for the afternoon session, a timing Sheriff Taylor had deliberately arranged. Let the judge get a feel for the town, for the people, before he hears your case, he advised Victoria. Let him see you as part of this community, not just a troubled woman from elsewhere. That evening, as Victoria sat on Martha's porch watching the sunset and trying to calm her nerves about the next day, Wade arrived with unexpected news. "Judge Hollister wants to see us," he said without preamble. "Both of us, tonight." Victoria's heart raced. "Did he say why?" Wade shook his head. "Just that he prefers to understand certain cases more thoroughly before they come to court. Taylor thinks it's a good sign, means he's taking the matter seriously." An hour later, Victoria found herself in the judge's temporary chambers, a simply furnished room with a desk, several chairs, and shelves lined with legal texts. Judge Hollister rose as they entered, his manner formal but not unkind. "Miss Ainsworth, Mr. Norton," he greeted them. "Thank you for coming. Please be seated." As they took the offered chairs, the judge returned to his place behind the desk, studying them with those penetrating eyes. "Sheriff Taylor has briefed me on the general outlines of your situation," he began, addressing Victoria directly. "I understand you're seeking protection from your husband, whom you allege has been physically abusive." Victoria swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor," the judge nodded, his expression revealing nothing. "Such claims are serious, Miss Ainsworth. They require substantial evidence, particularly when made against a man of Mr. Ainsworth's standing in Denver society." Victoria's heart sank. Would even this judge, whom Wade respected, default to believing a man of wealth and position over a woman with no resources of her own? But Judge Hollister continued, "I've seen too many women trapped in marriages that amount to little more than legalized torture. The law provides remedies, but they're often difficult to access, particularly for women without independent means or influential connections." Hope flickered in Victoria's chest. "Then you believe such situations exist, Your Honor?" "I know they exist," the judge replied grimly. "My own sister endured such a marriage for 15 years before taking her own life in despair. Since then, I've made it something of a personal mission to ensure the law protects those who cannot protect themselves." He looked at Wade. "Norton, I remember you from the war, steady man, honest, not given to exaggeration or drama." Wade nodded acknowledgement of the assessment. "Thank you, sir." The judge turned back to Victoria. "Tell me your story, Miss Ainsworth, not the legal petition, the truth as you lived it." For the next hour, Victoria spoke haltingly at first, then with increasing steadiness as the judge listened without interruption, his face showing compassion but no shock, as if her story was one he had heard many times before. She described meeting Edmund in Boston, the whirlwind courtship, the gradual change after their marriage, the isolation in Denver, the escalating violence, and finally her desperate flight. When she finished, the judge was silent for a long moment. "And you, Norton, how do you fit into this?" Wade recounted finding Victoria that first day, her injuries, her fear, the slow process of healing and rebuilding trust. He spoke with quiet dignity, making no attempt to hide his feelings for Victoria, but emphasizing the respectful boundaries they had maintained. Judge Hollister nodded, seeming satisfied. "One final question, Miss Ainsworth. What do you want from these proceedings? A divorce would be difficult to obtain without returning to Denver, where your husband's influence might compromise the process." Victoria straightened in her chair. "I understand that, Your Honor. For now, I'm seeking only protection, legal recognition that I have the right to live separately from Edmund, to work, to make my own decisions without fear of being forcibly returned to him." The judge considered this. "A reasonable request, and one within my power to grant, assuming the evidence supports your claims." He glanced down at some papers on his desk. "I understand Dr. Higgins examined you upon your arrival in Redemption Springs." "Yes, Your Honor. He treated my injuries and has agreed to testify tomorrow." "Good." The judge made a note. "And your plans for the future, Miss Ainsworth, assuming the court grants your petition, Victoria glanced briefly at Wade before answering. To continue teaching, Your Honor. To build a life here in Redemption Springs. She hesitated, then added with quiet dignity, to find happiness again. Judge Hollister's stern features softened slightly. A worthy ambition. He rose, indicating the meeting was concluded. Thank you both for your candor. I'll see you in court tomorrow. As they left the courthouse, walking slowly back toward Martha's house in the cool spring evening, Wade took Victoria's hand in his. You were magnificent in there, he said softly. Victoria squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from his touch. It felt good to speak the whole truth, to be heard without judgment. Hollister's a fair man, Wade affirmed. If anyone can see through Edmund's facade, it's him. Victoria looked up at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. Whatever happens tomorrow, Wade, I want you to know something. He stopped walking, turning to face her. What's that? You kept your promise, she said, her voice thick with emotion. When you found me that day, you said you'd wait until I smiled again. And you did. You gave me back not just my smile, but my hope, my sense of self. She reached up to touch his face gently. Whatever the judge decides, no one can take that away. Wade turned his head to press a kiss into her palm. No one, he agreed. Not ever. Court convened the following afternoon with what seemed like half of Redemption Springs in attendance. The small courtroom was packed to capacity, with onlookers spilling out into the hallway, straining to hear the proceedings. Edmund sat at the front with his lawyer, looking every inch the concerned husband in his expensive suit and carefully arranged expression of pained bewilderment. When Victoria entered with Wade and Martha, Edmund's gaze locked onto her, a flash of cold fury briefly displacing his sympathetic facade. Judge Hollister called the court to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. We are here to consider the petition of Victoria Ainsworth for a writ of protection from her husband, Edmund Ainsworth, he announced, his voice carrying authority throughout the room. This is not a criminal proceeding, nor is it a divorce hearing. We are simply determining whether grounds exist for granting Mrs. Ainsworth the legal right to live separately from her husband without risk of forcible return. Edmund's lawyer rose, a sleek man with oiled hair and a practiced smile. Your Honor, we contend that no such grounds exist. Mrs. Ainsworth has been suffering from nervous exhaustion and delusions following a severe illness. Her flight from Denver and these unfortunate accusations are symptoms of her condition, not reflections of reality. The judge nodded without expression. So noted, Counselor. We will hear evidence from both sides before making a determination. He turned to Victoria. Mrs. Ainsworth, are you represented by counsel today? Victoria stood, her heart pounding but her voice steady. No, Your Honor, I will speak for myself with the court's permission. The judge raised an eyebrow slightly but nodded. Very well. You may begin by telling the court why you believe this protection is necessary. For the next hour, Victoria recounted her experiences in clear, measured tones, the isolation Edmund had enforced, cutting her off from friends and family. The verbal abuse that gradually escalated to physical violence, the threats that kept her silent, the final beating that had been so severe she believed he might kill her next time. Throughout her testimony, Edmund maintained an expression of pained disbelief, occasionally shaking his head sadly or leaning to whisper to his lawyer. But Victoria kept her eyes fixed on the judge, drawing strength from his attentive listening and Wade's steady presence in the front row behind her. When she finished, Edmund's lawyer rose for cross-examination, his manner condescendingly gentle, as if speaking to a child or someone of diminished capacity. Mrs. Ainsworth, isn't it true that you suffered a miscarriage shortly before leaving Denver? Victoria tensed, but answered truthfully. Yes. And isn't it true that following this tragic event you became increasingly emotional, perhaps even irrational at times? I was grieving, Victoria corrected. Not irrational, the lawyer smiled thinly. Of course. Grief can affect people in strange ways, can it not? Make them see threats where none exist. Imagine slights or injuries. Victoria's hands clenched in her lap. My injuries weren't imagined, counselor. They were quite real. So you claim, the lawyer countered smoothly. Yet you sought no medical attention in Denver. If your husband was truly as violent as you allege, why not go to a doctor? Why not seek help from the authorities? Because Edmund controlled everything, Victoria replied evenly. Our finances, our social circle, my movements. He threatened to have me committed to an asylum if I spoke about what happened in our home. The lawyer affected an expression of sincere concern. Mrs. Ainsworth, fears of being wrongfully committed are actually quite common among those suffering from, well, certain mental disturbances. Murmurs ran through the courtroom at this insinuation. Judge Hollister gavelled for silence. Your Honor, Victoria said, her voice strengthening with indignation. I have witnesses who can testify to my mental competence and to the physical condition I was in upon arriving in Redemption Springs. The judge nodded. Call your first witness, Mrs. Ainsworth. Dr. Higgins took the stand, his testimony clear and clinical as he described Victoria's injuries when Wade first brought her to him, the cracked ribs, the extensive bruising, the defensive wounds on her arms and hands. In your medical opinion, Dr. Higgins, were these injuries consistent with a fall, as Mr. Ainsworth has suggested? Victoria asked. The doctor shook his head firmly. No, madam. The pattern and distribution of injuries were consistent with repeated blows delivered by fists. I've treated enough brawlers and domestic cases to recognize the difference. Edmund's lawyer attempted to suggest that Victoria's injuries could have been sustained during her journey from Denver, or even inflicted after her arrival in Redemption Springs to support her fabricated narrative. But Dr. Higgins remained unshaken in his assessment. Next came Martha Cooper, who testified to Victoria's state upon arriving in town, her fear, her nightmares, the way she flinched at sudden movements or loud noises. These weren't the actions of someone confused or delusional, Martha stated firmly. They were the reflexes of someone who had learned to expect violence. Several of Victoria's pupils' parents testified to her competence and dedication as a teacher. Miss Thornton spoke of Victoria's quick mind and organizational skills. Sheriff Taylor described his own observations of her behavior over the months since her arrival. Throughout it all, Edmund maintained his facade of concern, but Victoria could see the rage building behind his eyes as witness after witness contradicted his narrative of a confused, unstable wife. Finally, it was Edmund's turn to testify. He took the stand with an air of dignified suffering, portraying himself as a devoted husband blindsided by his wife's sudden change in behavior following her miscarriage. I blame myself, he said, his voice breaking artfully. I should have recognized the signs of her distress earlier, should have sought proper medical help before she became so confused that she fled our home. He looked directly at Victoria, his eyes shining with what the court would see as compassion but she recognized as warning. I want only what's best for her, to bring her home where she can receive proper care. His lawyer asked leading questions designed to highlight Edmund's standing in Denver society, his generosity to charitable causes, his reputation for integrity in business dealings. By the time the lawyer finished, Edmund had painted a picture of himself as a paragon of virtue, cruelly maligned by a wife whose grip on reality had been loosened by grief and illness. When it was Victoria's turn to question him, she approached the witness stand slowly, meeting Edmund's gaze directly for the first time since entering the courtroom. "Mr. Ainsworth," she began, her voice clear in the hushed room, "you've testified that I became confused and emotional after losing our child. Is that correct?" Edmund nodded, his expression one of practiced patience. "Yes, Victoria, it was a difficult time for both of us." "Indeed it was," Victoria agreed. "Especially since I lost that child after you pushed me down the stairs during an argument about a dinner party I had allegedly mismanaged." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Edmund's face flushed. "That's absurd." "I would never. You've testified that you want what's best for me," Victoria continued, cutting him off. "Yet in our 3 years of marriage, you systematically isolated me from friends and family, prohibited me from teaching music as I had before our marriage, and monitored my every movement." "How was that for my benefit?" Edmund's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, these are unfounded accusations. My client is not on trial here." Judge Hollister raised a hand. "Actually, Counselor, in a proceeding of this nature, both parties' conduct is relevant to the court's determination. Mrs. Ainsworth may continue." Victoria pressed on, her questions precise and direct, forcing Edmund to either acknowledge the truth of her claims or lie under oath. With each exchange, his carefully constructed facade cracked further, revealing glimpses of the cold, controlling man beneath. Finally, Victoria asked, "Mr. Ainsworth, if I were to return to Denver with you today, what would happen?" Edmund's lawyer objected again, but the judge overruled him, instructing Edmund to answer. "You would return to your rightful place as my wife," Edmund said, a hard edge entering his voice despite his efforts to maintain his benevolent persona. "And if I continued to teach, as I do here, if I maintained friendships independent of your approval, if I spoke openly about our private life." Something dark flashed in Edmund's eyes. "Such behavior would be inappropriate for a woman of your position. I would naturally guide you toward more suitable activities." "Guide me," Victoria repeated softly, "as you guided me with your fists when I displeased you in the past." Edmund's control finally snapped. "You ungrateful," he began, half rising from the witness stand before his lawyer grabbed his arm, forcing him back into his seat. But it was too late. The flash of rage had been visible to everyone in the courtroom, most importantly to Judge Hollister, whose penetrating gaze had never left Edmund's face. "I have no further questions," Victoria said quietly, returning to her seat. After a brief recess during which the judge reviewed the testimonies and evidence presented, court reconvened for his ruling. The room was silent as Judge Hollister cleared his throat. The purpose of this proceeding was to determine whether Victoria Ainsworth has legitimate grounds for seeking protection from her husband, Edmund Ainsworth. The judge's stern gaze swept the courtroom. "Having heard testimony from both parties and multiple witnesses, I find that such grounds do indeed exist." Victoria's heart soared as the judge continued. "The evidence clearly indicates that Mrs. Ainsworth fled her marital home not due to confusion or mental instability, but out of reasonable fear for her physical safety. Dr. Higgins' testimony regarding her injuries upon arrival in Redemption Springs is particularly compelling in this regard." The judge turned his attention directly to Edmund, who sat rigid with barely contained fury. "Mr. Ainsworth, this court hereby grants your wife's petition for protection. She is legally entitled to live separately from you, to engage in employment, and to manage her own affairs without interference. You are prohibited from attempting to remove her from Redemption Springs against her will, or from imposing any form of coercion, physical or otherwise, to compel her return to Denver. Edmund's lawyer leaned forward. "Your Honor, my client has rights as a husband under the law." "Indeed he does, Counselor," the judge interrupted firmly. "But those rights do not include the right to abuse. The courts of Colorado Territory have consistently held that excessive cruelty constitutes grounds for separate maintenance, if not divorce." He turned back to Victoria. "Mrs. Ainsworth, should you wish to pursue a full divorce, that would require a separate proceeding, likely in Denver where your marriage is registered. However, this writ of protection remains in effect indefinitely, regardless of any such action." With a final rap of his gavel, Judge Hollister concluded the proceedings. "This court is adjourned." The courtroom erupted in conversation as people began to file out. Victoria sat motionless, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief, disbelief, and gratitude. She had done it. She had stood up to Edmund publicly, told her truth, and been believed. Wade was at her side in an instant, his face alight with pride and joy. "You did it," he whispered, taking her hands in his. "You stood your ground and won." Martha enveloped her in a warm hug. "Knew you had it in you, girl. Knew it from the day we met." As Victoria accepted congratulations from the townspeople who had come to support her, she caught sight of Edmund pushing his way through the crowd toward the exit, his face a mask of cold fury. For an instant, their eyes met across the room, and Victoria felt a final shiver of the old fear. Then it was gone, replaced by the knowledge that he no longer had power over her. Edmund stormed out of the courthouse without another word, his lawyer hurrying after him. Victoria watched him go, understanding that while he might never accept his defeat, it didn't matter. She was free of him in all the ways that counted. That evening, as sunset painted Redemption Springs in shades of gold and amber, Victoria and Wade walked together along the creek path that wound behind the town. The judge's ruling had lifted an enormous weight from both of them, allowing them to speak openly about feelings that had been growing steadily since that first day when Wade had promised to wait until she smiled again. "What happens now?" Victoria asked as they paused on a small footbridge, watching the creek waters glide beneath them. Wade took her hands in his expression serious yet filled with hope. "That depends on you, Victoria, on what you want for your future." She looked up at him, this man who had become her anchor, her strength, her dearest friend. "I want to keep teaching. I want to remain in Redemption Springs among people who have become like family." She took a deep breath. "And I want to be with you, Wade, however that might be possible." Joy blazed in Wade's eyes. "I've been thinking about that. Judge Hollister mentioned that a divorce would require proceedings in Denver, where Edmund has influence, but there might be another way." Victoria tilted her head questioningly. "Nevada," Wade explained. "Their divorce laws are more accommodating. 6 months residency, and you could file on grounds of cruelty without Edmund's cooperation or presence." Hope flared in Victoria's chest. 6 months, Wade nodded. "It would mean leaving Redemption Springs temporarily. I have a friend in Virginia City who'd put you up, help you establish residency. It's not ideal being apart, but—" "Come with me," Victoria interrupted, the idea forming even as she spoke it. "We could both go. You said Frank Miller gives the hands time off in winter. Maybe he'd grant you a longer leave, especially if you explained why." Wade considered this, his thumb absently tracing circles on the back of her hand. "It's possible. Frank's a fair man, and he knows what happened today. Virginia City has ranches that might need temporary help." "We could start fresh there," Victoria suggested, growing excited at the possibility. "Or return here afterward if that's what we decide. The important thing is that we'd be together." "Together," Wade repeated, a slow smile spreading across his face. I like the sound of that. He pulled her gently closer. I love you, Victoria Ainsworth. Have since the moment you first smiled at me, really smiled, and I saw the woman you truly are beneath all that pain. Victoria's heart swelled with answering love. And I love you, Wade Norton. For your patience, your strength, your gentle heart. She reached up to touch his face, for waiting as you promised you would. Wade leaned down, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, tender yet passionate. The culmination of months of growing love and the beginning of something enduring and true. As they drew apart, Victoria smiled up at him, her eyes no longer empty but filled with joy and hope. It seems you won't have to wait any longer, she said softly. Wade's answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. No, he agreed, gathering her close again. No more waiting. Only living from this day forward. Against the backdrop of the setting sun, with the creek murmuring beside them and the first stars appearing in the deepening blue sky, Wade and Victoria sealed their promise to face whatever came next together, two souls who had found in each other not just love, but healing, strength, and the courage to begin again. 6 months later, as autumn once again painted the mountains in glorious color, Victoria Norton stood on the porch of Wade's cabin, their cabin now, watching her husband split firewood for the coming winter. The air held the crisp scent of pine and wood smoke, and somewhere in the distance, an elk bugled its ancient challenge. Their time in Nevada had passed quickly, with Wade finding work on a ranch outside Virginia City, while Victoria taught at a small school in town. They had married the day after her divorce became final, a simple ceremony with only a few new friends in attendance, but no less meaningful for its lack of pomp. Returning to Redemption Springs had felt like coming home. Victoria had resumed her position at the school, while Wade continued as foreman at the Miller Ranch. They divided their time between Martha's house in town during the school week and their cabin on weekends and holidays, gradually expanding and improving the sturdy structure to create a home that reflected both their tastes and dreams. Edmund had returned to Denver after his defeat in Judge Hollister's court, apparently deciding that pursuit of Victoria was not worth the public embarrassment of having his private cruelty exposed. According to occasional news that reached them through business connections, he had remarried a wealthy widow from San Francisco who, Victoria prayed, would be better equipped than she had been to recognize and resist Edmund's manipulations. Wade set aside his axe and approached the porch, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Norton," Victoria smiled, the expression coming easily now, naturally. "Just thinking how fortunate I am, how far we've come since that day you found me in the street." Wade climbed the steps to stand beside her, his arm slipping around her waist. "Some might say I'm the fortunate one," he countered, dropping a kiss on her temple. Victoria leaned into his embrace, her hand coming to rest on the slight swell of her abdomen, still barely visible beneath her dress. They had shared the news of their expected child with Martha just yesterday, the older woman's delight bringing tears to all their eyes. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Victoria asked, turning in the circle of Wade's arms to face him. Wade's expression softened. "I promised I'd wait until you smiled again." "And you did," Victoria affirmed, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "You waited, and in waiting you taught me how to trust again, how to hope, how to love." Wade captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "And now?" he asked, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled down at her. Victoria rose on tiptoes to brush her lips against his, pouring all her gratitude, all her joy, all her love into the gentle contact. "Now," she whispered against his mouth, We don't need to wait for anything. We have everything we need right here." As the autumn sun gilded the mountains and the wind whispered through the aspens, Wade and Victoria Norton stood wrapped in each other's arms, their past sorrows transformed into present joy, their future stretching before them like the vast western sky, boundless, bright, and filled with promise.